So I'm Samira Talegaonkar, and I have been tasked with speaking on dietary patterns and the role of dietary patterns and cardiometabolic health among South Asians. Before I start, I'd just like to thank the organizers for inviting me here today, and thank you all of you for so patiently kind of listening through after lunch, really a lot of our talks. My talk is not community-based, it is more academic. So I just wanted, if you have any questions regarding, so I have a lot of tables and figures. If you have questions or you'd like me to pause and explain a little bit, I'm happy to do that. In general, I will summarize what the findings were so that we are all on the same page. So before I kind of go into my talk, I had an outline for the talk. So I just wanted everyone to get a sense of what are South Asians, which countries do they originate from, what were the immigration patterns or the laws in place in the US that led to kind of the population of South Asians that exists currently. I will also speak very briefly about the burden of non-communicable diseases, or commonly known as the cardiometabolic or the chronic diseases in this population. After I speak about that, I will talk about the representation of South Asians in research, health-related research in the US, specifically focusing on a study which is called the MASALA study, which stands for actually the Mediators of Atherosclerosis among South Asians living in America study. A lot of my findings that I will discuss here today actually come from this study. And then I will talk about cardiometabolic risk in South Asians, specifically focusing on dietary acculturation, the role acculturation plays on cardiometabolic health in South Asians. And then lastly, just touching upon considerations for future research. So who exactly are the South Asians? Now, the South Asian individuals who identify as South Asians in the US include individuals who trace their ancestry back to countries in South Asia, which include Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, the Maldives, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. Past generations of South Asians who were originally from these countries but have settled in other countries such as Africa, Europe, Canada also might identify themselves as South Asians. It is important to note that actually Asian Americans are the fastest growing immigrant population in the US today. And the reason I bring about Asian Americans is that if you're familiar with US survey or NHANES data, you will realize that data is collected on this population, but we do not, or the federal government does not release, country-specific data. So if you identify as South Asian, you are still clubbed in the overall Asian American pattern or Asian American group. Now, within that Asian American group, you can see the figure over here, which kind of shows that the largest group are the Chinese Americans, after which you have the Indian Americans, individuals who identify from the Indian kind of subcontinent. And as you can see, these two kind of are the largest majority populations within the Asian American group. Over 70% of the population of South Asians that are living in the US are actually foreign-born or immigrant. So immigration actually accounts for the largest growth in this ethnic minority population. I want to stress over here, and I will discuss the reason why later on in my slides, that South Asians practice a lot of religions, several religions, and these sometimes dictate their dietary patterns. So they might practice Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Jainism, Judaism, and other religions as well. And the norms or the religious norms might dictate how individuals eat among South Asians. Oh, I'm sorry. I think the previous slide also, I just wanted to note, this is the projection that I mentioned, that Asian Americans are projected to be the largest immigrant population as we move forward. So, so far we have the Hispanic Americans, but Asian Americans will overtake Hispanic Americans and be one of the largest immigrant minority in the US. Now, the reason for, I would say, the growth and some of the immigration patterns, or why individuals who identify as South Asian might be following certain professions, was dictated by actually the immigration laws that were in place in the United States. So early on, there were very strict laws that actually prohibited Asians from immigrating to the US. And these were repealed in, I believe, 1965 or so. Yeah, 1965, which allowed individuals who identified as South Asians or coming from Asian countries to come to the US. However, the restriction was such that only individuals who were in kind of highly qualified categories or identified as professionals in these categories were allowed to immigrate. So hence you had the first wave of immigration taking place where a lot of the physicians or the highly qualified engineers were allowed to come to the US. So you have to keep this in mind when you think about, the professions, etc., that South Asians might follow, because it was the pattern was restricted. The immigration patterns were kind of restricted to these individuals. So hence, if you think about second generation Americans, South Asian Americans, they might be, they are from parents who were highly qualified or practicing physicians, engineers, etc. So they automatically have the same or might follow the same kind of professions. Now, this is just a very short kind of snapshot of studies that have focused on chronic diseases among Asian Americans. This is just to give you a context for why Asian Americans should be studied further with respect to chronic disease. And what this is looking at is small studies that were done in the US looking at type 2 diabetes, hypertension, overweight, obesity, etc. among the Asian American population. Now, what has been found is that compared to the US average, Asian Americans report type 2 diabetes at much younger ages. You might have heard that Asian Americans present with diabetes risk factors or diabetes at much lower BMI, so body mass index. Foreign-born South Asians also get diagnosed with hypertension much younger than white individuals or the general US population. Even in children, if you classify all Asian Americans together, the risk of overweight obesity is about 20%. But then when you start stratifying based on subpopulation groups, you can see that actually this prevalence is quite different. And I stress this because, as I mentioned, the national surveys tend to lump all Asians together, so it's Asian Americans, but there are differences and they have to be kind of studied. We have to emphasize because the risk factors are different, and so are the prevalence of chronic diseases. Second generation Asian Americans also, depending on which, second generation Asian Americans also have a higher prevalence of overweight obesity compared to, just newly immigrant populations, which needs to be also kept in mind. Now, this slide is just basically to emphasize the higher cardiovascular disease risk that Asian Americans carry. Now, if you look at the slide, the blue line on the top represents Asian Indians, so the South Asians that we speak about, and then you have the different other colors talking about the other subpopulations within Asian Americans. So if, for example, you just collapsed across all of the groups, you'd pretty much not see the difference in the higher risk that is experienced by Asian American populations for cardiovascular disease as well as cerebrovascular disease. So Asian Americans, both men and women, tend to carry a higher mortality rate as well as a higher prevalence of cardiovascular disease, which, as I mentioned, might be lost if you lump or collapse across all Asian American groups in your study or in any data that you're analyzing or any research that you're doing. Again, I'll explain exactly what we're looking at over here. This is actually a study or looking at results from what is known as the UK Biobank Prospective Cohort Study. So this is a study which is based in the United Kingdom. It includes both individuals who trace their ancestry as European as well as South Asian. And what this study was looking at if there are differences in the incidence of cardiovascular disease as well as the risk factors. So panel A, if you take a look at, the orange kind of line that you see, or the curve that you see, is the, I believe it's the incidence, or the cumulative incidence for cardiovascular disease among people who were followed in this UK prospective biobank study. The line at the bottom is for the individuals whose ancestry was European. So as you can clearly see, individuals with a South Asian ancestry have a higher risk for cardiovascular disease. Now, panel B and panel C, if you observe, are actually based on prediction equations. So I know a lot of you are physicians, and you must be pretty familiar with the pooled cohort equations, the Q risk equations that are existing. So those two panels are actually looking at risk prediction for cardiovascular disease using those equations. What you see is there is no difference. So when you are actually using the equation, you don't see that increase or the higher risk for South Asians, individuals with a South Asian ancestry, which indicates that traditional risk factors may not be the ones who might be driving the increased risk for cardiovascular disease among South Asians. And this is demonstrated in that table that, where you can see the hazard ratios, just to summarize, it was looking at all of the risk factors, commonly observed risk factors. So things like hypertension, diabetes, I think it's LDL cholesterol, unhealthy diet, etc. What you see is actually there was no difference, a significant difference between individuals with a South Asian ancestry versus those with a European ancestry with respect to cardiovascular disease. The only difference that you see is for nicotine exposure or smoking, wherein it is not significant for South Asians. And I will talk about that a little bit when I talk about the findings from the Masala study. So the traditional, as I mentioned, the traditional risk factors are not that different between the two. So basically, it's indicating that there is something else that might be driving the increased risk for heart disease and chronic metabolic diseases among the South Asians. Now that I've emphasized and spoken about, South Asians are or Asian Americans, and within that, the South Asians are the largest kind of immigrant population to the US. I have also told you the reason for why the immigration patterns are what they are. And I've also said that, South Asians carry a very high risk for cardiovascular disease and other cardiometabolic risk factors. Now, despite all of this, very few studies in the US have actually examined South Asians in detail and the reasons for this higher risk. This is current of 2018, and actually there has been no other commissioned cohort study that has taken place since 2018. There might have been a few intervention studies, but the study that I'm talking about is the one that I've highlighted in yellow, which is the Masala study, which was commissioned in, I believe, 2013, to start taking a look at the reasons for the higher risk for heart disease, the risk factors, study the risk factors among South Asians. So as I mentioned, Masala study, which actually in Hindi means spices. So you had other sessions this morning, but if you're familiar, South Asian food is characterized by the use of a lot of spices, and hence it's a good kind of play on spices, Indians, and I guess the risk for heart disease. But the overall objective of the Masala study was to determine what the traditional sociocultural, behavioral, and other novel risk factors for heart disease or atherosclerosis in South Asians. In terms of a study design, this is the only commissioned prospective longitudinal cohort study in the US. So NHLBI and the National Institute for Minority Health commissioned this study. The initial data collection, or the baseline for the study, was around 2010. So basically what they did was they went to the community and they recruited individuals between a certain age range. This is middle-aged South Asians, or individuals who identified as being South Asian. And then they had to be free of cardiovascular disease at baseline. And then they were followed over time, and the study is still ongoing. So it's not concluded yet. So it'll keep having serial follow-up examinations to kind of get at endpoints and other risk factors and the trajectory of the disease in South Asians. But it started with everyone kind of free from CVD, and then followed over time. So it has completed, and data are available if anyone is interested to look at the baseline data. They have ongoing cohort surveillance, which means during the time when a next follow-up examination is not taking place, you have researchers and their staff calling up participants every year to ask them, how are you doing? Did you have a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, or did you have any kind of cardiac event, etc.? So they have what is known as cohort surveillance. And then they had a follow-up examination 5 years later, so about 2015, which again took about 3 years to do. Currently, their second follow-up examination is ongoing. And as I will explain to you when I talk about the participant characteristics of this study, I will talk about the study expansion that they are having. Now, I didn't mention this previously, and I should have, is that Asian Americans, if you study the US, are located in, or the largest pockets are located in certain areas. So for example, Chicago is one, San Francisco is one, New York would be one. So as you can imagine, if you're doing a study of South Asians and you really want to recruit a good study population, the study sites would kind of included Chicago and San Francisco. And of course, the funding actually came to the investigators who were based at these two sites. So it is UCSF and Northwestern for Chicago. Now, this actually looks at baseline characteristics of the Masala cohort. I mentioned that this specifically over here because, as I mentioned, I will be talking about study findings from the Masala study. So it's important for you to understand what the baseline characteristics were of this population. So basically, who was included in this study. So if you look at the baseline characteristics, you will see that it was divided more or less equally between the two sites. The age range, as I mentioned, it included middle-aged South Asians. So the age was about 55 years. The language that was used for clinical examination or clinic visit, which indicates how comfortable you are with your immigrant country where you have migrated to, was English. Most of the study participants were very comfortable, giving their interview for that clinic exam in English. Almost 98% of the population, of the study population, was immigrant. So only about 2% was born in the US. They had lived in the US for an average about 27 years. And their birth country, if you look at, predominantly was from India. So they were kind of individuals who identified or, who were born in India and had migrated to the US. Again, talking about immigration rules and policies that were in place, if you look at the individuals who, the highest degree, most individuals actually had a bachelor's degree or higher. So it was a significantly well-educated population, which might reflect, obviously, the immigration trends that existed early on. Now, this slide talks about the examinations or the data collection procedures that were done as part of the Masala study. Now, this is important because, as I mentioned, we don't have any longitudinal design studies looking at risk factors for cardiovascular disease or cardiometabolic disease among South Asians. So at baseline, in addition to collecting information on socioeconomic factors, family history, education, the study also collected information on diet, which was very important because otherwise I will not be speaking about the dietary patterns of South Asians living in America. But so they collected data on diet, which was done using what is known as a food frequency questionnaire. They also have information collected on nicotine use, smoking status, physical activity, all of your kind of known risk factors for cardiovascular disease. They also collected information on alcohol intake, which is also important. And in addition to all of this, they had clinical examinations. So they obviously did blood draws where they looked at, fasting glucose, the 2-hour postprandial glucose. They looked at hemoglobin A1C. They obviously examined lipids. They also did very detailed clinical examinations where they did a CT scan for body composition, so you can get at the visceral fat distribution, etc., in the body. They also did what is known as CT imaging for coronary artery calcium, which is a subclinical, which is a measure of subclinical atherosclerosis. So as you can imagine, this was a very detailed examination that was done at baseline in the Masala study. As I said, it took them about 3 years to collect this data, and then they had the ongoing yearly cohort surveillance, where they just basically called up and said, have you had any major event? As in, did you have to go in for coronary bypass surgery, or did you have type 2 diabetes? So just trying to find out if any health outcome had occurred. They called the participants back after 5 years, and that was their exam 2, where they repeated all of the same assessments. So as you can imagine, this is a huge undertaking, obviously funded by NHLBI, to make sure that there is consistent collection of data in the cohort, so that we can monitor the trends over time and the disease progression if it is occurring over time. Currently, there is another examination that is ongoing, and they've added on an additional site, which is New York. And this site was added on because they found, as you saw, that the Masala study participants of the original study are kind of highly educated, right? So they have a very high education status, a high socioeconomic position. So they wanted to make, and most of them were actually born in India. So they wanted to diversify this kind of study findings, or they wanted to diversify the generalizability of their findings. So they included and now have a New York site, which includes specifically targeting individuals who are born in Pakistan and Bangladesh, because that tends to be an area which might have individuals who have migrated or immigrated from those countries. Now, just moving again, to the kind of the first topic that was addressed or looked at and is of importance when you study South Asia, when you study, I would say, immigrants in general. Is everyone familiar with the process of acculturation, or am I the first speaker? Oh, the first, okay. So what exactly is acculturation? Acculturation is the process by which groups or individuals adjust to the social and the other cultural values, ideas and beliefs and behaviors of their, they change from their country of origin or the country of birth, and they choose or may not choose to adopt them from their immigrant country, so the country they move towards. So it is obviously a process which takes place at different levels. So you have something at the social level, the psychological level, as well as the cultural level. So you are experiencing a host culture. You're going from your origin culture to a host culture, and you're subjected, or you have all of these different things that are happening to you, right? So that process of change in an individual, or it actually might be at a larger scale as well, is known as acculturation. The acculturation I am talking about for this talk is actually related to the individual level. So this change that is taking place when an individual is moving from one country or one culture to another. You might actually have it at a much larger level, wherein a country is colonized by another country. So they have, certain changes that take place because of, adapting some of, to the country that has colonized you. If you are aware, probably, you know that India, Pakistan, etc. Were colonized. Well, we had the partition, but before that, we were colonized by England, right? So we've had, individuals have had, coming from this, from South Asia, have had two kind of acculturation, and if they've moved to the US, have had these two occurrences take place. Now, acculturation can be measured using changes in language. So how familiar are you with the language of the country you've moved to, or the host country? How comfortable are you with the dressing style, the food, as well as other aspects of culture? So you can have different ways of getting to or measuring acculturation. The modes of acculturation, so in general, can be classified as assimilation, wherein an individual who is having the least preference for the country of, or the culture of origin, so from where he, she, or they came from. You might have integration, where basically they are having intermediate preference, so they have adapted some from the host country, and some they still hold true from their country of birth or where they came from. And then you might have separation, which is having a high preference for the country or the culture of origin, so where you came from. So you're trying to hold on to the values of where the country you came from were. And then you can have marginalization, which I haven't seen as much studied, but it is rejection of your own culture as well as the culture of your host country. The most common ones that are examined, as I mentioned, are assimilation, integration, and separation. Now, I spoke about acculturation, but this actually is looking at another phenomenon, which is known as dietary acculturation. So obviously, acculturation is a little bit higher level, where you have changes or adaptation taking place with respect to language, the way you dress, your thoughts, maybe your ideas, etc. But dietary acculturation is very much specific to changes that can take place because you have moved from your country of birth to a host country or a new country, and you have now changes occurring or taking place in your diet. Now, the framework that I've put over here is in this actually has been put forth several years ago, and it is a commonly accepted framework. You have to understand that what the researchers or what the framework puts forth is that the process of dietary acculturation is dynamic, and a lot of factors actually influence it. For example, as you can see in the table, you have things like the age at which you immigrated into the country, right? So if you were younger, maybe you did your schooling in the host country. So I'm just going to assume the US. So you maybe had lunch in school. So you are more familiar with the foods that are available, kind of the traditional or the American foods that are available in the school lunch program. It could be if you immigrated with a family and you have older individuals present in your family, they might want to hold on to their traditional cultures. So you may have to kind of cook, or may have to use or stay with the traditional foods that were eaten in your host country or where you came from. If you have children who are, you immigrated, but you have young children, so they might be going to school, or they might have birthday parties or whatever, so they get exposed to foods that are consumed by the general US population. So they might ask or request those of you to be made at home. So that also influences how you're going to adapt or change your own diet, reflecting dietary acculturation. Then you have the cultural factors. Certain things like religion, your cultural norms, how do you think about eating certain foods or not, all taking place. Then you have the individual level factors, things like where you live, do you have access to grocery stores that might sell, what we call them as Indian grocery stores, so the basically stores that sell foods that are from India or from South Asia. So do you have access to those, etc. In general, what we find is that people either adapt or change their diet in such a way that they're eating either completely traditional, so it doesn't really matter, or they try and adapt what is known as a bicultural. So maybe at home they eat, for their evening meals, they eat the traditional foods, so the traditional Indian foods that might be consumed at home. But if you are talking about going at work, you might actually carry the sandwiches or prefer to eat the kind of host country specific foods. So the first question again, this table is really busy. I apologize. I will just give you, like what is kind of to be emphasized here. But this is one of the first questions that was examined in the Masala study, which was what is the weekly food and food group intake by length of residence in the US? What you have over here is the tertiles of the length of the stay in the US. So the first tertile will be the shortest duration. The one in the middle is like middle duration. And then the third tertile is individuals who have lived kind of in the US the longest. So what you find over here is that so before I proceed further, the hypothesis that the researchers actually had was that the longer you live in the US, you will adapt, or you will be eating more Western style, or you'll be eating kind of more American. So your foods will reflect, given that you've stayed here so long, you have started adapting your foods into the more American kind of dietary pattern. But unfortunately, or I guess it's not unfortunately, but what they ended up finding was actually mixed results. A longer length of residence in the US was associated with higher intakes of things like alcoholic beverages, mixed dishes such as pizza, etc. And then lower intake of what you would think of as traditional foods, such as beans and legumes. I think previously also individuals have spoken about beans and legumes. If South Asians, especially those who follow a vegetarian diet, beans, legumes, and lentils tend to be the primary protein source. So that is what you observed over here. When you actually looked at, sorry, oh, it's clear because I thought the table is cut off because it's cut off for me in the front. But when you looked at the nutrient composition, you also found differences across nutrient profiles as the length of residence in the US was examined. So basically, the key findings from this kind of investigation using data from Masala was that South Asians living, immigrants living in the US, their intakes did differ by length of residence, but it was largely mixed. So for example, there was an association of lower intakes of foods such as rice, starchy vegetables, sugar, jam, etc. The longer you lived, but also there was a higher intake with things like fats. So there was, it was not all good and not all bad. So it was like a mixed bag that you got. And then when you look at these distributions, or you look at the mean values and you start comparing, you realize that some of the differences are rather small. So then the question is like, does this really matter? Does this have a role in chronic disease prediction if you kind of start looking at it further? Or should you actually be considering the entire dietary pattern? Like how do individuals in general eat? And that was the next question that was kind of queried in the Masala study. So now again, very busy table, but I'll walk you through it. So as I mentioned, the first set of investigations indicated a mixed bag of results, something good, something bad, but there were differences. So it warranted a more detailed, or I would say looking at not even a detail, because that was really detailed. This was taking a step back and looking at the entire dietary pattern. So what investigators actually looked at over here was they use what is known as dietary pattern approach. Now, this is a statistical method that is also spoken to of as a data reduction approach to look at what foods, or what are the patterns that emerge in the population and what foods characterize this pattern. So if you can see, you have animal protein as a name there. You can see the fried snacks, sweets, high fat dairy. That was another pattern that emerged in this population. And then you have the fruits, vegetables, nut, legume pattern that emerged. So basically there were three main patterns that emerged in this population, and people kind of, and they were named based on what foods dominated that pattern or how the people ate in that pattern. There is also a vegetarian diet pattern, and that was just based on if people reported being vegetarian, yes, no. And this was in South Asians, this tends to be generally lacto-ovo vegetarian. So they consume the milk and they consume the eggs, but they will not consume flesh foods or seafood. And then the last one that you see, the AHEI, the nutritionists might be familiar. It is known as the Alternative Healthy Eating Index. It is a score of kind of judging, or I wouldn't say judging, scoring one's diet. So the higher the score, the better it is for you. So you're adhering more to a healthy pattern. In this particular investigation, they looked at what is known as traditional cultural beliefs. So these were questions kind of that were developed by the Masala study investigators, because obviously they were looking at novel risk factors. This is a study of South Asians. So they specifically asked questions, 7 items, which included things like, how much would you like these South Asian traditions be practiced in America? So things like performing religious ceremonies. So if you, so you had to indicate, would you like this or not like this? Serving sweets at ceremonies. So it's a very traditional kind of practice, and anything, a very happy occasion, you generally have sweets that are given and distributed because something happy, you passed an exam or you got good grades, and then generally are rewarded, or people distribute sweets. Living in a joint family, that means multiple, I would say, generations living in the same family. Very commonly, a common practice, not so much, I would say, anymore in India, but has been done in the past. So you would have your grandparents, your parents, and then you would be living, so things like that. The higher the score that they had actually represented weaker traditional cultural beliefs. So the first line over there actually looks at, so if you had a higher score, it indicated that you had weaker traditional cultural beliefs. Now, this is looking at the odds of consuming a certain dietary pattern. So these are odds ratios. But what it basically indicated, so I'll just summarize because we have a bunch of odds ratios over there, was that weaker traditional cultural beliefs were associated with higher odds of consumption of animal protein pattern and lower odds of consuming a fried snack based pattern. So if you had weaker traditional cultural beliefs, you tended to be in that animal protein pattern. So you probably had a diet which basically you consume more flesh foods. Now, the next set of questions that you had were looking at questions which were associated with how the individual kind of line items, or like each kind of question. So how often do you fast? So if you worked or you have clients or you have patients who are coming from South Asia, you know that some of them, because of religious reasons, might fast on certain days because it is for a religious purpose, or they might eat certain foods and not eat certain foods. So that's a very traditional practice that is followed. And then you might have things, how often, if you go out to eat, would you eat at South Asian restaurants? What kind of friends do you have in your social circle? Again, the higher score indicated a weaker weaker practice, so weaker South Asian belief. And what you saw over here was that weaker individual traditional cultural practices were associated again with a higher consumption of animal protein, less, so the less fasting, eating less South Asian food. So if you had a choice, would you go to a South Asian restaurant or would you eat something else? So things, those choices that people have to make, so those influenced or were associated with which kind of dietary pattern you followed or tended to follow. Now, just moving away again from, so I mentioned a culture. So we started with length of residence in the US, then we spoke about acculturation, we spoke about traditional cultural beliefs. Now, this is another concept that I will have to actually throw at you, which is the concept about your identity. And this was another question that was examined in the Masala study. So acculturation may actually shape your ethnic identity as well as your national identity. So your national identity basically is how you are integrating with the host nation, so where you have moved to, versus your ethnic identity is the strength of the connection between being an immigrant with my native ethnic group, right? So one is your national identity and one is your ethnic identity. So the hypothesis of this particular investigation in the Masala study was that individuals who have a higher or score higher on an American identity actually might have a higher risk for cardiometabolic kind of risk factors, so are not doing as well. Now, please keep in mind, you have your you received a score for your American identity and received a score for ethnic identity. And the distribution of the scores are in the bottom that you can see, the bar chart, the distribution chart that you can see there. And almost 32% of the Masala study participants indicated strongly identifying as South Asian, so having a very strong ethnic kind of identity. Versus the distribution for the American identity was averaging about 5.5. In this particular analysis, the investigators also thought that certain factors such as diet, physical activity, social support, social connections might be mediators in this association, so they were adjusted for. The results basically indicated, and the results are in the, oh, sorry, my slides no longer show up there. Oh, now they do, sorry. Was that a higher self-rated American identity was associated with a worse kind of cardiometabolic profile. So they had individuals with higher scores for an American identity actually had worse LDL, total cholesterol, systolic and diastolic blood pressure. There were no differences for the glucose glycemic control parameters. But there was an association tending towards a less favorable profile. So, that was another kind of, looking at a domain of acculturation, which is very important to be, as I mentioned, examined, because if you remember the UK Biobank study, there were no differences across the traditional kind of risk factors between those with South Asian ancestry and those with European ancestry. Again, Masala study results. And in this case, this was looking at those acculturation strategies that I spoke about. So as I mentioned, and it's detailed on the bottom. You have separation, which is preference of a South Asian culture over the US culture. That is kind of a acculturation strategy. Another is integration, which is similar preferences for both US and South Asian culture. And then you have the assimilation strategy, which is preferring the US culture over the South Asian culture. Right? So this is looking at classifying people in the masala study based on those kind of acculturation strategies and examining risk profiles. So in this particular slide, you can see the 2R glucose as well as the HDL, parameter for HDL. And what you found over here was for men, actually, there were no differences across what strategy was that they practiced or they got classified into. But for women, you did see that women in the white bars over there, so those are the individuals who have the separation strategy. Am I right? Yep, the preferring South Asian culture over the US culture. They actually had a higher 2R fasting, the 2R, glucose values. They also had lower HDL levels, right? So again, no differences for men, but women who prefer or their strategy is to focus more on the South Asian part versus the US actually did a little bit worse than those who tried to assimilate into the US culture. Again, this is looking at triglycerides and body mass index. No differences for men, but clearly there are differences for women, wherein the women who have, who prefer the South Asian culture to the US culture actually do a little bit worse for certain parameters. This particular slide, just in case anyone is interested to look at the comparison, because that was looking at all three together. This is looking at the integration versus the separation and the assimilation strategy versus the separation strategy. So what you found over here, that in general, South Asian women who employed an assimilation or integration strategy had a more favorable cardiometabolic profile compared to women who actually employed a separation strategy. So the conclusion that individuals or the researchers kind of came to was that there is something going on how women, South Asian women, adapt or change, and that is linked with their cardiometabolic risk profile. This, as I mentioned, was not significantly associated for men. So I gave you a lot of information on the masala study, and as I mentioned, I present that because that is the only prospective longitudinal study of South Asians in the US, but I thought I should look at the neighbors, what is Canada doing or what studies do they have? So this was a study that was done in Canada, which was looking at immigrants, again, South Asian immigrants who had come to Canada, and looking at or asking, they asked them questions whether did they change or improve related preferences. And what you see over here is that immigrating to Canada, actually individuals, the South Asian immigrants there indicated that they had access or were able to choose more healthy foods while eating out. So that was something that they said they made a change. They look at and read nutrition labels. That was another change that they made. They made effort into looking at the foods have good nutritional value. So indicating that positive changes were made or were also made, are also made when individuals move from a country of origin to a host country. The same set of other changes were made with respect to cooking or the way people cook, wherein individuals reported using other techniques which might not be as commonly used in South Asian countries. So things like barbecuing, baking, grilling, etc. were also adapted. But again, not everything was positive. There were a few negative also changes that took place because individuals commented and said that they had more access to convenience foods, soft drinks, etc. So they, ended up purchasing that as well, and they might not. And that was a change that they made from, their host country or from where they moved from. Now, the next kind of set of slides talks about American Heart Association's cardiovascular health. Anyone familiar with Life Simple 7 and Life's Essential 8? Okay, so that's great. So in 2010, the American Heart Association kind of put forth their set of guidelines for what they termed as cardiovascular health. This is actually a summary construct that includes factors such as health factors and health behavior. So in 2010, American Heart Association put forth, as I mentioned, Life Simple 7. So there were these 7 kind of variables in this construct. It included things like blood pressure, blood glucose, blood cholesterol, body mass index, smoking status, diet quality, and physical activity. So those were the 7. Now, when they put forth those variables and they call this Life Simple 7, they also gave everyone, that if you are between this and this range, you are considered to be ideal for this particular variable, and then you could come up with a score. So it was kind of a translational message, so the practitioners could give their clients, like, this is what is important for making sure that hopefully you don't develop cardiovascular disease in the future. And if you do have high blood pressure, you could still use that kind of scoring system. It's just that you got kind of scored in the middle category as long as you were controlling your blood pressure, etc. So this was kind of a translational message. Also, if you're aware, American Heart, their journal, it comes out with the stroke and the heart disease statistics every year. Like at the end of the year, they have, this is what the US is doing with respect to mortality, morbidity with respect to cardiovascular disease. And since 2010, they actually also publish how the country is doing with respect to these Life Simple 7. Obviously, if you're wondering where the data come from, they all come from NHANES. And if you're familiar with NHANES, as I mentioned, Asian Americans tend to be collapsed. Asian Americans are all collapsed. You don't actually have the South Asians separated from the Filipinos or the Chinese Americans, right? So the next set of analysis that I will be talking about is looking at Life's Simple 7, which then got updated last year, if you're familiar, to what is known as Life's Essential 8. It's pretty much the same set of variables, but they added sleep, because over the 10-12-year period, they realized that sleep intensity, duration, is also really important for health. So they added on sleep. They changed the scoring slightly, but we won't go into the details, but it's pretty much, all of the 7 previous variables that I spoke about. In addition to that, you have sleep. Now, this is the prevalence of Life's Essential 8, the overall metric, or that construct that we spoke about, because I said you score each of the components and then you get an overall score. The higher the score, the better it is, because it indicates you're adhering more closely to the guidelines that have been put forth by the American Heart Association for cardiovascular health. So as you can see over here, the red indicates individuals who are actually not doing well, so they got a really poor score. The yellow is the one that is kind of intermediate in the middle, and then you have the green, which indicates individuals who have actually done pretty well, who have gotten a good cardiovascular health score based on Life's Essential 8. Looking at the distribution, you can clearly see everybody kind of seems to be right in the middle. You do have individuals who are at the low as well as on the higher end, but the Masala study participants were kind of all in the middle. And if you're wondering how did this compare with NHANES, it's pretty much the same. I believe the average was about for the Masala study was 64, and this was 67. And then it was 64 or something for Masala. So it's kind of in the same range. When you started looking at the individual dietary components, and this becomes important when you are trying to talk about prevention strategies or counseling or things like that for your participants in a study or your patients, etc., you can clearly see that diet was the one that did the worst. So very few participants had a good or a high score for Life's Essential 8 diet metric. Again, this is also very similar to NHANES. So pretty much diet is the one that actually scores the worst in the general US population as well. Then you can look, the one that actually fares really well is the nicotine exposure. As I mentioned, I think I brought it up in a previous, the UK Biobank study. Compared to the general US population, South Asians do very well for that exposure, because not many individuals state that they smoke or they have exposure to secondhand smoke. What is surprising, and if you look at it, is the physical activity variable. It also shows really very good scoring. And then, that was actually looked at really closely in the masala study because we were surprised to see that. And the reason for that finding actually is this, that when Life's Essential 8 was scored, what they looked at was the minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So they just looked at the time spent. They did not look at the intensity that was done. So a lot of the masala study participants indicate that they go for walks. So that counts as a moderate physical activity. So it's not a sedentary behavior, right? You're getting up and doing some kind of physical activity. But keep in mind that is actually low intensity, right? So you have to, if you're making recommendations, you're worried about osteoporosis, any of these things, that actually is problematic because you need to emphasize the higher intensity physical activity, even though they've done really well, right? The scores is actually really, really good. So the investigators decided to look at the differences by sex and look at the social, psychosocial and cultural factors. Because I mentioned again, acculturation and other non-traditional kind of risk factors might influence cardiometabolic risk profile among South Asians. So what they looked over here was, stratified by these various kind of domains. So as you can see over there, female participants, individuals, female participants with higher SES, socioeconomic position, scored higher. When you looked at education, again, those who had a higher degree of education did better. Individuals, again, depression was another one that had differences for Life's Essential 8. And then what was reflected in my previous work about assimilation, separation, those acculturation strategies, the traditional cultural beliefs also showed a difference across for women. Another thing that you have to note over here is that you can see the country of birth, right? So I mentioned to you that most of the masala study participants are from India, so they were born in India. There were a few that were born in Pakistan, and actually the ones that were born in Pakistan reported, when they were scored, they actually had worse Life's Essential 8, indicating that even now within South Asians, when you start looking or you dice the data looking at country specific, there is a difference. As I mentioned, the masala study, the original study had mainly Indians from India, so South Asians coming from India, and now they have expanded because they know the risk profile varies by country of birth as well. So this might be reflective of some kind of early determinants early in life, and this is something that needs to be studied in South Asians, has probably been examined in other populations, but not so much in the masala study. Now, in case you're wondering, did the Life's Essential 8, did this metric actually have any prediction value? Because obviously, if you're a physician, you're like, does this even matter? Does it predict any kind of outcome? Actually, yes, it did matter. It did and was associated with coronary artery calcium, which is a measure of subclinical atherosclerosis. So the higher the score, so the better you did with respect to Life's Essential 8, you actually had a lower odds of coronary artery calcium. So it did show prediction value. So it is important then to go back and see which factors can we target for South Asians if that is your client population. And now the last set of analysis I can quickly go through, it was looking at the vegetarian diet. So I mentioned right at the start that, your faith or the religion that you follow sometimes determines what you eat. And unlike in the US or European populations where people consume a vegetarian diet because of health reasons, South Asians might follow a vegetarian diet because of religious reasons. So which means that they may not focus so much on the health factor, but more on the religious factor. So in this case, the goal of the study was actually to look and see if, did following a vegetarian diet, were healthy foods consumed, healthful foods consumed, and if so, was a vegetarian diet predictive of subclinical atherosclerosis? We just have 5 minutes. This is just looking at the eating occasions and the types of foods stratified by whether you were a vegetarian or not. As you can clearly see, beans and legumes were eaten more frequently or more by vegetarians, obviously, because that was their primary protein kind of source. Not so much, so there's a clear difference there. And then I think there were a few other differences which were seen. But what is more important is that Cardiovascular risk factors also differed by vegetarian status. So these highlight some of the differences. And what is more important, if you are familiar with the body fat distribution among South Asians, we did find that fatty liver was actually the odds of fatty liver was less among those who followed a vegetarian diet. So vegetarian diet was protective for fatty liver. There were differences for subclinical atherosclerosis measured using CAC. And this was only for the men, not for the women. So the differences were not significant there. So in summary, I just wanted to state that there is evidence, and I obviously want to state that this is obviously coming from the Masala study and few small investigations, but as I mentioned, that is unfortunately all we have at this juncture. There is evidence that South Asians are the fastest growing ethnic minority population by immigration. And that is really, really important, because if you remember my earlier slides, South Asians are projected to be or Asian Americans will kind of bypass Hispanic Americans as well. South Asians present with high levels of hospitalization and mortality from cardiovascular disease at a very younger age. That was one of the slides that just summarized this information. And then, the results from the Masala study investigation show that dietary patterns, intakes, and behavior differ by things like acculturation status and by the length of residence in the US. Acculturation strategies and resilience measured might also actually play a role with respect to cardiometabolic health, especially if you remember the results for the women. And then in general, other social, psychosocial factors need to be considered. So, the country of birth is important when as I mentioned in the findings from the Life's Essential 8. So all of these kind of have to be investigated, have not been looked at, but are being considered by the Masala study investigators. And this is I just wanted to end with a framework which looks at the different kind of domains that this study is looking into. If anyone's interested, you can actually just Google Masala study. All of the literature that I've cited is already published, is available, like the PDFs are available on the study website. It's a really collaborative group of investigators if anyone has any interest of doing research with respect to South Asian health. Thank you.